Hey guys, it's Kira and welcome back to another video. Today you're about to get a fully fledged insight into the history of my favourite books because if you've been watching any of my videos lately, you might know that I have been feeling just a smidge uninspired by the books that I've been picking up this year. I've read a few good ones, but in February especially, I didn't really read anything that completely just took me away to another world. I've read some interesting things, but nothing that just captured my imagination entirely, and that makes me sad. So I have decided that instead of meandering through the month of March and trying to find a book that does that for me, I'm going to be turning to some old reliables that I know I love, and we're going to be rereading some of my old favourites, which I'm just so excited about. I truly believe rereading books is massively underrated, at least in the world of bookish online content creation, because I used to reread books all the time. I would reread books probably more than I would read new books. But since coming onto YouTube and making videos about books, I've definitely felt the pressure to constantly be reading new things and especially keep on top of the hype of new releases to make interesting content about books that other people are going to enjoy. But actually, I think rereading books definitely has its place on BookTube and also just in life in general, because you can have a book that you love, and maybe it's going to be a book that you'll love forever, but equally I think our reading experiences each time we pick up a book are so influenced by what's going on in the world, in our life, how we relate to the characters and what's going on in the story compared to our own lives at that time. And so your opinion of a book can really dramatically evolve as you do as a human, and I just think it's so fun to go back, revisit old favourites and see how your opinions change over time. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing this reading vlog, and hopefully that will in turn reignite my passion for reading by turning to some books that I'm pretty confident I'm going to love. So with that in mind, I'm going to be starting with a book that I would say, if anyone was to ask me right here, right now, what's your favourite book of all time, I would say Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. So I think it's definitely time to reread and see whether that is still the case. I read this for the first time in the first lockdown we had in 2020. I then reread it just a couple of months later in May of 2020, and I haven't picked it up since then. So while I loved it then and it still sits firmly as a favourite in my mind, I also think it would be really fun to return to it probably pretty much 2 years later to the time when I first ever picked it up in lockdown number 1 and see how I feel about this book now, having evolved into the world as it currently stands. So that's the first book I'm going to be picking up. I am hoping to read quite a few favourites throughout this reading vlog and see how I feel about them all. But before we dive into all of the reading, I wanted to let you know that today's video has been very kindly sponsored by Ana Luisa. Many of you will know that I have partnered with Ana Luisa before, and I absolutely love them as a brand. First and foremost because they have the most incredibly beautiful jewellery I have ever seen. I wear their earrings every single day without fail. They are always with me because I just think they're so cute, delicate, beautiful, and just really add something to a look without you really having to try very hard. So I always have the Celeste earrings in because I just absolutely love them. So the fact that they have beautiful jewellery is definitely what makes me love them first and foremost. But the second reason I love them, and definitely the more serious reason, is because they're a brand who really value sustainability. They are a carbon neutral jewellery brand. Their products are all super high quality, so when you go and either treat yourself or someone else to a piece of beautiful jewellery, you know that you're getting a product that will last you a really long time and is also kind to the environment. That's something that's really important to me, and I'm sure it will be a really good value for a lot of you guys as well, and that is why I love Ana Luisa so much and will continue to use them forever. But the reason I'm partnering with Ana Luisa today is because Mother's Day is just around the corner. When it comes to Mother's Day, I always personally like to try and make sure that I get my mum something really nice that will last, and that means I always partner up with my siblings, my brother and sister, so that we can get her something that is actually really nice, not any of the rubbish tack that's just out for Mother's Day and then will get thrown in the bin afterwards. We always make an effort to get her something that she will love, and that usually ends up being one of two things, either perfume or jewellery. So this year, of course, I'm going for jewellery, and Ana Luisa had such a wealth of choices that it was honestly so hard to narrow down. I actually ended up picking up 2 things because Ana Luisa currently have a sale on for Mother's Day where you can buy one price product and get the next one for 40% off. And so I actually was a little bit selfish there and ended up getting one thing for my mum and one thing for myself. Though my mum and I are actually very, very similar, and so it really was a toss-up until the products actually arrived on my doorstep as to which one I was going to keep for myself and which one I was going to give to my mum. And the reason for that is because I'm wearing one right now. I ended up deciding to keep the Gemini Necklace, but my mum is also a Gemini, so it could have gone either way. But as you can see from my constellation mug here, I'm a big fan of star sign like apparel. I love to have star sign mugs, jewellery, makeup bags, you name it, I've got it. And I just think Gemini is such a lovely word. So I picked up the Gemini pendant necklace, which I just think is so gorgeous. And the reason I love it so much is because it's very delicate, like all of their necklaces are. It's not too in your face, and I really like that, where you can just have a piece that like brings something to the neckline but equally doesn't like throw the whole outfit off, if that makes sense. And this Gemini necklace is super cute because it is a pendant that has two Siamese cats on, of course, to represent like the two personalities of Gemini. And I think that's really clever because obviously I know that it's a zodiac necklace, but equally you could look at it and just think it was a necklace with two cats on, so it's quite a subtle piece of zodiac jewellery. So that was the first thing I picked up that was either going to be for me or my mum, but ended up being for me in the end because it was just too cute to part with. And then for my mum, I ended up getting a beautiful pair of earrings. I think these look so cute just in the little packaging, which makes them a great gift. And I pop them out and we have these gorgeous fleur earrings which have a dangling rose. I think these will be perfect for my mum because, like me, she likes earrings that have a little bit of pizzazz to them, but also for work and everything are not like too out there or in your face. And I think these will be absolutely perfect for her because her middle name is Rose, so it's really nice when your jewellery can kind of like tie into something special. But again, like the zodiac necklace not being too obviously zodiac-y, these aren't like, hey, my middle name's Rose, but it also adds a little bit of personality to them, in my opinion. So those are the pieces of jewellery that I picked up for Mother's Day, and I just think that buy one, get one 40% off sale is the perfect opportunity to get something that your mum will love and be able to treasure for years to come for Mother's Day, but also treat yourself to something as well that is 40% off. So that is why I'm partnering with Anna Louisa. You can follow the link in my description box down below to go and find your own Mother's Day gifts. And now, without further ado, let's get on with some rereading.
And you ever wonder if days like these last with one another, with the feeling pass? Would you find out with me if it all starts to crumble?
Well, this morning I've woken up with hair that can only be described as larger than life, so that is the vibe that we're going for today. But it is now the next day, and last night I did make a start on reading Conversations with Friends. Or rather, I started it yesterday afternoon, but then the evening kind of caught up with me and I got involved in all of the menial tasks of the everyday evening, such as making dinner, having a shower, chatting to Jay, and of course doing my daily Wordle before swiftly going to bed at about 8 PM because that is just who I am. I do wake up every day at about 5 AM, so it kind of counters out, but it does feel like I'm losing a lot of time when I go to bed so early, but equally if I woke up any later, I'd feel like I was losing time that way, so you can't really win. I'm just an early riser and that is like a fact I have to accept about myself. So I did start on Conversations with Friends, but I didn't read as much as I had planned to, but that is a-okay because I now have plenty of time to dedicate to it over the weekend, which I'm super excited about. What I did read though just reignited my absolute love of Sally Rooney. I was on like a Sally Rooney frenzy obviously she only had 2 books at this point, but when I first read Normal People back in 2020, followed swiftly by Conversations with Friends, and then rereading them both like pretty soon after that, I was just absolutely enamoured with her writing style, and I was so excited when Beautiful World, Where Are You was announced. However, I just didn't feel the same about that book or its characters, and that kind of like left me feeling a little bit jaded, which is partly the reason why I wanted to come back to this one, to kind of like remember why I loved Sally Rooney's writing style so much. And already just a few chapters in, I'm feeling that love so much, because I just love her writing style in Conversations with Friends and Normal People, and I do feel they are very similar books. I just think she has a very pared back, simplistic way of writing that doesn't overdo it with description or like fluffy like flowery language, but instead is just very like almost blasé and to the point, but in a way that, without saying that much in terms of quantity of words, is very revealing about the characters. And I just think the way that she is able to manipulate the language in such a way that you don't really have to read too much to understand quite a lot of what's going on is really clever, and I particularly like it. I do think reading this book in particular, where our main character Frances is like a very observing sort of protagonist, like she has a lot of insight into what's going on around her and all of the characters that she interacts with, kind of makes me feel like her and Sally Rooney are probably fairly similar, and that potentially, as this was her debut, maybe there was like a little bit of herself that went into this first protagonist. But I really like it. I feel like because of that fact and how I love the writing style and the way that she is so simplistic and yet so like on the nose all of the time, I could probably just reel off hundreds of quotes every time I open this book, because it is just like so rich with text that I just absolutely adore. But I picked just a couple to highlight some of the things that I really enjoy. So the first one is when Frances is describing her best friend and ex-girlfriend Bobby, and the way that they first met in secondary school, and it says, "When we were 17, we had to attend a fundraising dance in the school assembly hall with a partially broken disco ball casting lights on the ceiling and the barred up windows. Bobby wore a flimsy summer dress and looked like she hadn't brushed her hair. She was radiantly attractive, which meant that everyone had to work hard not to pay her any attention." I just thought that was such a funny way to kind of explore that kind of like annoying person at school that people dislike, but also they're kind of like alluring with their like energy and also like their appearance. And I just thought that was such a fun way to kind of explore Bobby. And then by context, like Frances does compliment her, so it kind of shows like the way that their relationship and interactions kind of function and the dynamic of their friendship, which I really liked. And then another one is really, I think, quite a relatable insight into like how we feel about wanting attention and how it's a very complicated issue. So Bobby and Frances perform spoken word poetry together, and they're spotted by this older journalist called Melissa, who wants to write an article on them and take some pictures. But as is the case in almost every circumstance, Bobby is like the preferred person by Melissa, and Frances has some complicated issues on this. And it says here, "I had wanted Melissa to take an interest in me because we were both writers, but instead she didn't seem to like me, and I wasn't even sure I liked her. I didn't have the option not to take her seriously because she had published a book which proved that lots of other people took her seriously, even if I didn't. At 21, I had no achievements or possessions that proved I was a serious person." And so I just thought that was a really like revealing insight into something that I think a lot of people can get on board with, which is like you don't even have to like someone to want them to like you. I think it's innate in humans to want to be liked, even though we know as people that we don't like everyone we come across. And it's a complicated thing because you can not like someone but want them to like you, because it's offensive to think that someone doesn't like you, even if you don't like them. And if you sort of dive into it in your own brain, you know it's stupid, but that is just the nature of being a human. And then also this like feeling of impending doom that I think comes with like being near the end of your education. And so Frances is like coming towards the end of her degree and is starting to feel like she doesn't know what direction her life is going to go in or what she has to prove who she is as a person. And I think that is a relatable thing that comes up at many times in people's lives, but I think the first time it can often come up is that kind of like end of education. Wherever that is for you, it suddenly feels like the end of what has been your entire life to that point, and it's a bit of a daunting prospect. So I think that little passage there captures so much of relatable content, and I love it, I really do. So like I mentioned, is now the next morning, and today I'm heading out to go for a coffee with my sister, but I'm going to meet her via train. So that means I have time to do some train reading, which I'm super excited about because it's been ages since I've done any train reading. And then I'll catch up with you later when I'm home, hopefully with much more of conversations with friends done.
Welcome aboard this Northern service to Leeds.
I've said it many times, I know I would change my ways, I know for sure. When all the crows decide to meet, they settle down beneath my feet. I've got it right and I got it wrong, but I learned my lesson hanging on. Come sit here with me by the fire and let it go for a little while. So be here as the night starts falling. Let my fingers walk over your head. We got nothing to be scared of. I'd rather be with you than by myself. Now all is in your hands. When I was young, I thought control.
Both of my trains today managed to be horrendously late, which was at first kind of annoying, but then ended up being kind of good because it did give me even more time for reading. So by the time I got home, I was first and foremost absolutely exhausted. I genuinely could have dropped dead from exhaustion right there and then, but luckily I had a couple of biscuits and they brought me back to life. But second of all, I was also almost finished with this book, and that meant that I just sat down with a good cup of tea this afternoon, finished off the book, and it is my favourite book. Like, it is my favourite book ever. I feel like I've read it a few times, and now I feel like I can confidently say each time I've read this book, I've absolutely loved it, not wanted it to end, and also simultaneously felt as though I could go right back to the start pretty much immediately and enjoy it just as much the next time around. It just completely enthralls me, and it's one of those books for which I can't really put into words why I love it so much and why it just like speaks to me, and yet somehow it does. And like, I actually found myself being kind of like emotional reading it this like afternoon when I got home. Just certain parts of it I feel like are just so relatable, in the sense of Frances's inability to make herself vulnerable to the people that she loves, and the way that that kind of puts up a wall around her and prevents her from getting the affection that she desperately like wants and needs, until she has kind of like destroyed a relationship, and then and only then is she kind of able to like put herself out there and have that vulnerability. And I just think it's so like sad to watch, but you just feel so much empathy for her as a character, because obviously as the like readers we get the best insight into her and see that like level of vulnerability that the people in her life don't get the opportunity to see because of the way that she kind of presents herself with a bit of hostility. So yeah, I absolutely love that. I also think, and have said in every reading experience that I've had with this book, that the exploration of endometriosis is so incredible, but also like really important. I think it's something that I can relate to, not in the sense that I have endometriosis, because I do not, but in the sense of having like issues that are just kind of pushed aside because they are like to do with feminine health, and therefore you're kind of just like pushed away or told that you're too young to have these issues, or they're just kind of masked with like the pill and you're not ever really given the insight into what is causing the issues. And that's something that I experienced when I was only maybe like 14 years old, and so seeing that in a book I think is really important, because the more that these topics are talked about, the more that people who experience these issues will hopefully feel empowered to like demand answers rather than just allowing themselves to be told that they don't really have an issue. So I think that's another really powerful part about this book. And finally, I think the thing that does distinctly make me prefer this one to normal people, because like I said, they are both very similar books and books that I both really enjoy, but I think the thing that makes this one just slightly more appealing is that it does feel just a little bit more conclusive at the end. It's still a fairly open ending, which I think Sally Rooney loves, but I feel like this one just feels a little bit more settled and hopeful, whereas the normal people ending feels a little bit catastrophic. So really love it, so glad to have reread this one, and yeah, it is just my favourite book of all time. So if nothing else, this vlog has confirmed to us all what my favourite book ever is, so that's great. But now I'm going to go and head upstairs, pick my next favourite book to reread, and yeah, get on with some more reading before I go and pick Jay up from work in a little bit. Book for my second favourite, because as you saw last night, I picked up Misery by Stephen King, and almost as if by magic, when I picked up a horror off of my bookshelves, it started raining, and it was just like the perfect evening to start a chilling read such as this one. So started Misery, and unlike Conversations with Friends, which I've obviously read a few times by now, this is actually only the second time I've ever read Misery. The first time I read it was back in, I believe, 2019, when I did my very first Stephen King 24-hour readathon. This was the last book that I started. I didn't quite manage to finish it in the 24 hours, but obviously did finish it pretty much straight after that, and absolutely was just enamoured by it, because I have read quite a few of Stephen King's most popular books. I won't say I've read quite a few of his books in general, because as we all know, he has the most insanely sized bibliography ever. There are just so many books in it, but of his like most popular ones, I've now read The Shining, I have read Pet Sematary, I've read Carrie, I've read It, and of course have read Misery, and I stand by the fact that Misery is single-handedly the most chilling thing that Stephen King has ever written, and I think that is because none of this book is based in the paranormal. So whereas in Pet Sematary and The Shining and It, we have these like sort of otherworldly figures that are raining horror down on the human world, and of course that is scary and creepy and unnerving, but equally it can kind of be separated from reality in the sense that, you know, it is fiction. Whereas this book, while it is obviously very much fiction, and there's actually even a note at the beginning of the book from Stephen King which says the places and characters in this book are fictional, because I guess he maybe thought, I need to make this statement because of the fact that it stands out from his other books, in the sense that there is nothing paranormal going on here. So we simply have, for the majority of this book, two characters and a very interesting power dynamic, and there is a lot of tension, and this book unnerves me like nothing else. And I think that comes down to the fact that, unlike other Stephen King books where you feel you could push your fears onto the paranormal and know that when you close the book, you know that it was all made up. In this book, you know that this could actually technically happen. Far-fetched as it may seem, it is something that humans could do because there is nothing spooky, paranormal, magical, or otherworldly about it, and it comes down to the darkness that can be within human nature, and I think that is the thing that makes this book so unnerving. So, if anyone doesn't know what Misery is all about, we have, like I said, just two characters for the majority of this book. We have Paul Sheldon, who is a famous author known for writing a book series set in the 1800s about this woman called Misery, and it's kind of like a trashy romance style historical fiction, and he personally hates it and wants to end it, but he then ends up getting in a car crash right at the beginning of the novel, and the book picks up with him being rescued by someone who just happens to be his #1 fan, and this woman is called Annie Wilkes. She's an ex-nurse, and rather than taking Paul to the hospital, she takes him to her home and essentially nurses him back to health whilst also keeping him prisoner. So that is the premise of the book. It's very, very creepy, and I think the fact that you are just dealing with two characters for the majority of the story makes it feel very claustrophobic, very tense. You definitely feel like you're reading things from the perspective of Paul, and so you feel his fear and the tension and the nerves that he has around Annie, who is just this very volatile character who's clearly unhinged. I love it because I think it's so powerful how much tension Stephen King is able to create with such a small cast of characters and in such a simple setting. It just is incredible, so unnerving. Definitely I can feel my heart rate going up as I read this book, but yeah, reading it again has just reinforced why I would consider this my favourite Stephen King book, because yeah, it just has such an impact on you because it's so unnerving and very, very, very confronting to read. So I'm currently on page 103, which is probably just under a third of the way through this book, and I'm definitely planning to get through as much of this book as I can today. I don't have any plans as of right now other than going out for a quick drink with my dad and my brother at some point this afternoon, but other than that, it's just me, Misery, and I'm sure plenty of tea to get me through the reading process. So just back from my little drink with my dad and my brother. Well, I've been back for a little while now. Pyjamas have obviously made their way out because that was my last and only outing of the day, and I'm now just cooking some dinner. But I have also been doing some more reading of Misery whilst letting the food cook, getting ready for dinner, and I'm now on page 201, so I'm about 2/3 of the way through now. Definitely have read more than I have left to read, which is great, but oh my god, this book is just so intense, and I think what is testament to how well Stephen King has written this story and just how good of a writer he is in general is the fact that I have seen the movie multiple times, I've read the book once before, I know exactly what's going to happen and what the outcome is, and yet still I feel so much tension and apprehension as if I'm experiencing the story for the first time. And I think especially when it comes to thrillers, horrors and books of that genre where the anticipation is a lot of what makes the book so gripping, it's so impressive that I can go into it, read it again and still feel as though I'm a new reader who doesn't know what's going to happen. Though the rational part of my brain knows that I do know how it's going to turn out, the part of the book that is just so descriptive and enthralling kind of makes you forget that and feel as if you are experiencing it all over again. So it's just so good, so intense. I feel very on edge when reading it, and for that reason, while I have dinner, I'm going to take a much needed comedy break and watch I think we're going to watch some episodes of Seinfeld with dinner, which will lighten the mood again before getting back to some more reading. And possibly even finishing this book before I go to bed tonight, because quite frankly I'm hooked, like to the point where, again, even though I know what's going to happen, I still can't bring myself to stop reading because I just want to know what's happening and when and how much is going to go on. It's just so gripping. The only thing I will say about this book that is kind of like a mark against it in my opinion is that part of the narrative is about Paul, the writer, being pressured into writing another misery story for his #1 fan, and parts of the book do like long excerpts from the novel that he's writing, so kind of a book within a book. But because I don't really care about that story, it's a little bit of a drag to read those chapters, but luckily they don't come up too often. When they do, they feel quite long, but that's like the one thing about this book I don't like. But on the whole, the story about Annie and Paul is just so gripping. I love it. Careful. Well, I stayed up past my bedtime, by which I mean that it is now like 9 p.m, but I managed to finish Misery, which was my goal for the evening before going to bed, and oh my god, this book was just so good. I'm just basically boosting my ego throughout this reading vlog because it is just sort of reminding me that I have good taste in books, because all of these favourites are just like living up to all of my dreams and more, which is great, because although I was open to the fact that I might not like them as much going back to them after a couple of years, the truth has been that I'm still loving them just as much as I originally did, and that is a wonderful thing. But yeah, with Misery, everything that I said today stands. It is just super intense, very, very chilling, because of the fact that it comes down to the darkness of human nature rather than anything kind of paranormal, and I think that just in and of itself is just a very unnerving feeling that sort of permeates right from the very first page to the last, and it just does such a good job of making you feel really, really tense and nervous throughout the whole reading experience. Separate to Misery, I suppose, but it is something that happens in this book, but it's something that Stephen King does in quite a few of his books that I personally really appreciate, is that he makes subtle references to other works of his in a lot of his books, and I think that's so fun because it's like sort of like a, I guess like an inside joke, not really a joke, but it's kind of like, to know the reference you have to have read the other book, and if you haven't, then it just is like another piece of detail in the story, but if you have, it just feels like a really nice nod to the fact that these things are happening within one universe. So Misery takes place in Colorado, as does The Shining, and this book makes a very small reference on page, I guess it's like around halfway through, 200 and something, it makes reference to the Overlook, which is the hotel where The Shining takes place. And what it says about the Overlook and the reference that it makes is a big spoiler for The Shining, but in order to know that it was a big spoiler, or for that to really have any relevance to you, you would have had to have read The Shining. And so for anyone who reads that and recognises the Overlook, you'd obviously know what had happened already, and if you didn't, like I said, it would just seem like just another part of the story. It wasn't really giving you any spoilers for anything else, because it doesn't reference that it's actually The Shining, if that makes sense. So I think that's really fun because it's great for people who have read them but doesn't ruin things for people who haven't. So really liked that, and that's just something I enjoy about Stephen King in general. But that is favourite number 2, done and dusted, and it is a Saturday evening. As I said, it's definitely past my bedtime right now because I'll be getting up early in the morning, so not going to start a new book this evening, but I think the next book I'm going to read is going to be The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary, which I would probably say is my favourite romance book. So we've had a favourite literary fiction in the form of Conversations with Friends, a favourite horror in the form of Misery, and now, to lighten things up, a favourite romance. So that's what I'll be starting in the morning, but for now it's time for a good night's sleep and hopefully not too many bad dreams as a result of Misery. I just love Sunday mornings. I started out my day with a very quick gym session before coming home, having the most wonderful cup of coffee that I have ever tasted. Not to be dramatic, but sometimes coffee just hits so good, and this one was just perfect. And I also made a start on reading The Flat Share. I then just quickly dropped Jay off at work, and I've now driven myself to a hot yoga class, which I'm slightly early for, hence the reason I brought the book with me in the car so that I could do a little bit more reading before going into the yoga class. That turned out to be a great idea because I am now, having just started the book first thing this morning, already 126 pages into this read, and I'm just loving it so much. It's such a fun, light-hearted and easy read, which is exactly what I wanted to kind of uplift my spirits after 2 very enjoyable but undoubtedly more serious books. Obviously, Conversations with Friends is interesting because it is an easy read in the sense that it's written in a way that's quite digestible, but equally it's quite heavy in the subject matter, and while romance and relationships certainly play a key part in the narrative, it also deals with like quite a lot of other things, and it's definitely got like a darker overtone to the novel, and it's certainly not one that you describe as a romance book, though romance does play a part in the narrative. And then of course Misery, for obvious reasons, is quite a dark book as well, and so The Flat Share was just like exactly what I wanted, to have something like light and uplifting to kind of finish this weekend of favourite rereads. So The Flat Share, for anyone that doesn't know, was Beth O'Leary's debut novel, and I think it's my favourite of her books. I have read and enjoyed all of her books so far, but this one I just think is so fun and so unique, and it really just like ticks all of my boxes, and was the book I would say that kind of like opened my mind up to romances, because previously I'd kind of been a bit of a reading snob and thought of romances as being like a little bit fluffy and stupid and insignificant, and this book showed me that yes, they can be fluffy and insignificant and stupid, but in the best way. And I feel like it just really sort of like took me down a peg or two and made me open my eyes to the fact that books can just be for entertainment sometimes. They don't need to do anything like dramatic or make any major points on the world and the way that things are going. It can just be fun and uplifting, and this book is that to a T. Now, for anyone that doesn't know what it's about, it's a book that focuses on a flat share, surprise surprise, and specifically it's a very unique flat share dynamic because we have a girl called Tiffy who moves into a flat that is already lived in by a guy called Leon, and they basically share this flat without meeting each other because their work schedules are conflicting. So they are not only sharing a flat, they're also sharing a bed, and essentially they are like living in this 1-bedroom flat together without actually living in it together, if that makes sense. So Tiffy works a typical 9-to-5 office job in London, and she isn't making very much money, hence the reason that she's looked into a flat share such as this. Meanwhile, Leon is a nurse who works night shifts, and so they are never in the flat at the same time. On the weekends it's all Tiffy's, and Leon spends the weekends with his girlfriend, and essentially they are like in this dynamic where they have a flat all to themselves, but at the same time it's a shared space, and they start to get to know each other through writing notes and sort of like communicating in a very like unorthodox way, and you just see this blossoming of what is initially a friendship throughout the book. And I think it's just such a fun way to get to know each of the characters on a very individual basis without romance being kind of like at the heart of it, but also get to see this really incredible friendship developing in a really unusual way, and I love it. So I'm definitely going to be doing more reading of this class later on. But for now I'm going to go to my yoga class, and then I think Sarah is coming around this afternoon, so that is fun as well. But for now, time to go and get stretchy and sweaty because it's hot yoga. Out, when I put my mind to it, I can actually read quite quickly. I feel like I always show myself this when I do anything where I'm trying to like read a certain amount of books in a certain amount of days, or a 24-hour readathon, that when I really put my mind to not being distracted, aka not turning on the TV every minute that I have spare, not scrolling on my phone every time that I just like get slightly bored or distracted, I can actually read really quickly and focus so much better than when I am getting distracted by external things. So as you saw, Sarah and I spent a little bit of time doing some afternoon reading together. I actually got quite a bit read in the car this morning between my yoga classes and dropping Jay off at work and all of that kind of stuff, and I have very successfully managed to finish off The Flat Share just now this afternoon, and as per usual, or at least as per this reading vlog where I've loved every single thing I've read, it was wonderful and I loved it. You know, there's that saying where if you work a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. The thing that I've taken from this weekend and all of the great books that I've read is that if you always read the books that you already know you love, you'll never read a bad book in your life. And whilst I am not writing off reading new books again, because obviously I'm going to read new books, I am going to try and make more time for returning back to old favourites, because there's just something so comforting and like wholesome about reading books that you know you're going to have a great time reading, spotting new things in it or refreshing your memory, because what I've found this weekend is that while I can remember that I love the essence of a book, it's very difficult to remember all of the intricate details of books that you read a few years ago, and so coming back to them kind of feels like meeting an old friend and catching up, because you know that you like them already, but equally there is still something new to be found every time you open the pages. So love this. The Flat Share was such a fun way to finish this weekend, and definitely I feel like I've read these books in the perfect order. Conversations with Friends was the perfect book to just kickstart this experience because it is my favourite of all time and I loved it so much. Misery was quite tense, and then The Flat Share was overwhelmingly wholesome, and I just feel like I covered all the bases of my quite eclectic reading taste this weekend and I had the most wonderful time doing it. Have firmly rated all of these books 5 stars, and they were all so wonderful and so different from each other, and that is why I love them. So I've had a wonderful time this weekend rereading old favourites. Hope you've enjoyed seeing me essentially just gushing over all of the books that I love so much, and I would love to know if you have reread any old favourites recently, or perhaps if this video has inspired you, which old favourite you will be picking up next, because I cannot stress this highly enough. I would recommend this so much, especially if you, like me, had been in a bit of a reading slump, but even if not, I feel like it's such a great way to uplift your spirits reading a book that you already love. So that is it in terms of reading. I just wanted to quickly remind you that today's video has been sponsored by Anna Louisa, and if you would like to either treat your mum for Mother's Day or yourself, or maybe a little bit of both, then you can take advantage of the link in my description box down below and use their Mother's Day sale where you buy one and get one 40% off to treat yourself and someone else to some lovely jewellery. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.